Welcome to Story Jury, where we examine real internet stories and you deliver the verdict. If you enjoy narrated Reddit, consider a like and subscribe. Today's first case starts now. The day my youngest turned 15, I learned that grief has a way of finding a microphone. We were at our weekend market, the one with fresh eggs, honey, and handmade chocolates. I gave her a birthday budget and the freedom to roam. She went off smiling, a bag of sweets in her future. An hour later, my phone rang. Her voice was shaking. She said a group of older women had cornered her. I grabbed my older daughter and ran. Near a row of produce stands, 6 women had my youngest backed against a table of peaches. They scolded her for not visiting her grandparents and for refusing to be a good big sister to 2 boys who came from a situation none of us asked for. My girls have a therapist. They are working through pain that did not begin with them and should never have landed on them. I stepped between the women and my daughter. I told my oldest to take her sister's things, pay, and go to the car. Then I faced the crowd. Some faces looked familiar from my former in-law's church. Voices rose. I was told I was a failure for not obeying my ex-husband's parents. I said we were leaving. Market staff asked us all to go. The women followed me to the parking lot like a storm that did not know it was over. I got my daughters into the car and drove away. Here is how we got to that moment. I am a 46-year-old mom of 2 teenage daughters. Last year, my ex-husband died in an accident. Before he died, I learned he had been unfaithful. He fathered 2 boys with another woman who also later passed away. The discovery shattered my daughters. It broke our home. And when the dust had barely settled, my former in-laws tried to take the girls and, at the same time, tried to move in with us. The first part is headed for court. The second will never happen. That night after the market, once the girls were asleep, I messaged someone from that church who has always treated me fairly. He apologized for what happened, then told me the source. My former mother-in-law had posted a dramatic tale on the church's Facebook group. In her version, my daughters and I were cold and cruel. We were leaving them with nothing. We supposedly refused even to speak to them. She blamed us for the boys no longer living with her, and ignored that the boys had been placed with other relatives for their own stability. Every difficult fact was bent toward one conclusion: we were the villains. That church has strict views about fidelity in marriage, equally for husbands and wives. My former mother-in-law knew that, so to explain the boys, she invented a story. The other woman had been our surrogate, and I rejected the babies because they were boys. It was false, and it was ugly. I stared at the ceiling until morning and then made a decision. I was not going to argue online. I was not going to trade insults. I was going to let the truth speak in plain words. Years of paperwork were already in order because I had been in the middle of a divorce when my ex-husband died. I had messages, timelines, and confirmations. I had proof that the affair was real, that it was not a surrogate story, and that my former in-laws had known about it. I had messages where they minimized the cheating. I had a record of them pressing my daughters about the boys, harsh words sent days after their father died. I removed details that did not belong in public. I left names out that did not need to be there. I kept it simple, factual, and clear. Then I made sure the same community that heard the fiction would see the facts. No spectacle, no shouting, no names on a billboard. The information reached the congregation in a calm, unmistakable way. Enough for anyone who had been told we were heartless to understand how the story had been twisted. What happened next traveled faster than I expected. A gossip wheel began to spin, and the pastor had to step in to cool everyone down. People who had cheered the original post started to reconsider. Some were angry about what my daughters had endured. Others, still stuck on their beliefs about marriage, told me I had failed in my duties, but claimed to understand that shock can make a person stumble. I did not ask for their approval. I asked for my daughter's right to peace. 2 letters arrived in our mailbox. Apologies. One invited us to visit the church for support. I put the letters on the counter. My daughters read them. We did not go. As for my former in-laws, the wind shifted. The sympathy they had banked dried up when the facts surfaced. They left the church soon after. My former mother-in-law posted publicly that the world is cruel to the elderly and that if her great son were still alive, he would have taken care of them. I did not respond. I had been the one carrying the mortgage, the groceries, and the calendar for years. Silence, for once, was the loudest thing I could say. Some people have asked why my daughters and I inherited certain funds while their grandparents did not. The answer is simple. My ex-husband had told me our girls were his beneficiaries. The will said otherwise, naming his parents. I never asked to be listed myself. In my own will, my daughters are the beneficiaries. That has always been the plan. When the accounts settled after he died, some assets were designated to the girls by policy, independent of the will. Lawyers explained it, paperwork confirmed it. I stuck to the documents and to what was right for my children. Let me be clear about one more thing. My daughters do not owe anyone a performance of grief. They are teenagers who were blindsided by their father's choices, and then by his death. They told me the truth when they discovered it, and that truth put events in motion that none of us could stop. The guilt for those events does not belong to them. It never did. I think about that day at the market, 6 adults pressing in on a 15-year-old to demand compliance with a narrative that made their lives easier. That was the day I decided the story would stop bending. That was the day I chose to put facts where fiction had been sitting, not to punish, not to humiliate, but to cut a clean path back to reality. We are still going to court over custody, because the law moves at the law's pace. We still receive the occasional message urging forgiveness, which often sounds like forgetting. But inside our home, the noise is lower. My girls go to school. They bake brownies. They see their therapist. We celebrate small, quiet wins, like a morning with no tense messages, or a laugh at dinner that lands and stays. People will say what they want to say. Some will always prefer a tidy narrative about a broken home and a woman who should have held it together no matter what. But a home is not a public relations campaign. It is where the youngest among us must be safe. If I have failed at anything, it will not be that. The church can keep its rules about marriage. I am not here to debate doctrine. All I ask is that the next time someone rushes to defend an adult's reputation, they pause and look at the children in the frame. Ask who is being asked to carry the weight. Ask who is being told to do the right thing, when the right thing looks suspiciously like silence. The binders of truth, literal or not, are on a high shelf now. We do not revisit them unless we must. I do not hand them out. I do not need to. The people who wanted a story have one. We have a life. In the end, this is not about winning a comment thread or being praised for clever delivery. It is about boundaries. When my daughters were cornered, I chose them. When lies filled the room, I opened a window. Not to shout back, but to let in air. We still buy our eggs at the market. We walk a little taller past the place where the voices rose that day. Sometimes we get strawberries. Sometimes we only need bread. Most days, we just get to be a family, which is more than enough. Final remark. You can rewrite a reputation, but you cannot rewrite the truth. My job now is simple. Keep my daughters safe, keep our peace, and let the facts stand on their own. Okay, on to the next story. I did not plan to become the historian of my own betrayal. It started small, stray details that didn't add up. Our 2 kids were 4 and 6, chatty enough to recount their little adventures, old enough to notice patterns. They kept mentioning days at my wife's parents' house. Sweet grandparents, sure, but they lived about 90 minutes away. 2 or 3 trips a week felt like more than family time. It felt like a schedule. When I asked, she brushed it off. She was never a convincing liar. I watched the days stack up, the miles too, and dread settled in like a storm on the horizon. Then one afternoon, I sat down at the computer and noticed a sticky note by the keyboard. Her email password, written in her handwriting. Temptation is not noble, but truth sometimes demands a witness. I logged in. The messages were not subtle. Exchanges with her college best friend. My wife talking about seeing an old boyfriend from high school. Not once. Routinely. She mocked his wife, too. Cruel jokes about a woman who'd carried children and looked like someone who had. I printed what I needed and put it away. Paper is heavy in the right hands. I thought about my parents, about the way their affairs scorched my childhood. I had promised myself long ago that I would never let chaos make a home around my kids. So I called a professional, a licensed investigator, someone who keeps records, not wars. I gave him the broad strokes and stepped back. In time, he returned with a clear account. Lunches in the middle of the day, a cheap motel for a few hours, a drive back to pick up the kids. Dates, times, photos. No gossip, just facts. I hired a divorce attorney. I made a plan for the children first. Housing, routines, the quiet scaffolding that keeps a life standing when a wall gives way. I asked the investigator to learn one more thing. Who was the man? His name does not matter, but call him Bob. Married, 3 kids, a vice president of sales at a company owned by his father-in-law. That detail folded the story into something larger. Families, jobs, consequences. I had the papers drawn up. A clean serve at my wife's workplace. The end of a story that had been telling itself in the margins. On that same day, I asked the investigator to do something I believed was right. He met with Bob's wife and showed her the truth. Not my interpretation, not my anger. The truth, plainly documented. What she did with it would be her decision. I would not speak for her. I would not speak at her. I would only make sure she was not the last to know. In the legal sense, my wife's infidelity barely changed the math. The court focused on assets, on custody, on guidelines written to keep proceedings from turning into theater. But outside that room, the truth ripples. Bob's wife made choices I will not judge and do not need to explain. Public filings later showed what followed. She took her children and left. She closed their joint account and protected her side of the ledger. Her father learned what had happened and fired Bob from the company. The house they lived in, owned by her parents, was no longer his either. Divorce is a grinder. Their separation turned ugly. There were orders to keep the peace, reports when people failed to keep it. At one point, an argument at the house brought her brother to the door. A scuffle, an injury, more paperwork. Courtrooms do not heal hearts, but they do set boundaries, and sometimes that is the only medicine a situation will take. If you search for Bob now, you will not find much. He left the state, according to people who keep track of these things. His ex-wife landed on her feet. She went to work for her dad, then took the reins when he retired. I wish her steadiness and quiet. As for me, I kept my world simple. My ex and I spoke about the kids, and only the kids. School calendars, doctor visits, pickups, and drop-offs. Our conversations became logistics, not life. When the children grew up, the communication faded. I do not hate her. Hatred is an anchor that drags. I had 2 people to raise and no energy to waste on sinking. Looking back, the part that breaks me is not the betrayal itself. It is the way the grown-ups made messes and then expected the little ones to wade through. Children should not be shields. They should not be cover stories. They deserved the truth told gently, and the adults to act responsibly around it. This is not a how-to. It is a cautionary memory. If you were listening for tactics, you missed the only lesson worth hearing. Truth has consequences, whether you chase them or not. I did not ruin anyone's life. I set a line and let gravity do what gravity does. People chose, and their choices lit their own exits. There are details I left out of the public record because not every fact belongs to strangers. There are words I will never say in front of my kids because they should not have to hold them. What mattered was this: The situation came into daylight. Lies withered there. A path forward appeared, narrow but sturdy. I took it. I learned a few small things along the way, that privacy can be misused to hide harm, and transparency, careful, respectful transparency, can stop a story from getting worse. That a licensed professional with a notebook is more reliable than a temper with a megaphone. That quiet choices can carry farther than loud revenge. I also learned what forgiveness looks like when it isn't a performance. I did not excuse what happened. I did not pretend it was meant to be. I forgave myself for missing signs. I forgave myself for trusting someone who stopped deserving it. And then I focused on the only job that mattered, raising 2 kids into 2 adults who know what safety feels like. Years later, the dust finally settled. The house sounds different when your children leave it, but echoes do not argue back. My calendar no longer has 2 columns for custody weeks. There is only the rhythm of regular days. I make dinner for 1. I answer text messages from grown children about big meetings and car trouble and holiday plans. I wish them what I did not have at their age, peace that does not depend on other people's promises. And if you were wondering what happened to the anger, it turned into boundaries. A boundary is not a wall. It is a door with a lock and a person who knows where the key is. I learned to protect the quiet I built. I learned to say no without starting a fight. I learned that the most powerful sentence in a burned-down chapter is often only 3 words. No more, thanks. Here is the part I remember most clearly. The day my wife was served, I sat in my car and listened to the engine tick as it cooled. I looked at the steering wheel, at my hands on it, and I understood something simple. I did not need to win. I needed to stop losing sleep, stop losing time, stop losing pieces of myself to a life that pretended to be fine while the beams cracked behind the paint. So I went home. I cooked dinner. I folded laundry. I called my kids into the living room and told them in careful language that fit their ages that the grown-ups were going to live in different houses. I told them they did not cause it. I told them we would love them in the same amount, just in a new shape. They asked if we could still do pancakes on Saturdays. I said yes. We did. Bob's chapter drifted out of my story after that. I only heard updates when the ripples touched public records. People move, names change, jobs begin and end. What stays is not the scandal. Those headlines get recycled with new actors every year. What stays is the steady decision to set your life back on its rails and keep it there. If you need a moral, take a modest one. Do not let anyone sell you a version of loyalty that requires you to lie to yourself. Do not mistake secrecy for romance or confusion for passion. Do not keep the lights off because you are afraid of what the mirror might show. Turn them on. Let the room be what it is. Then choose. And if you need a larger one, take this. Be kind when you can. Be brave when you must. And when bravery and kindness seem to argue, remember that protecting children, yours, someone else's, the kids still learning to breathe inside your own chest, comes first. Final remark. I did not torch a life. I opened the shades and walked out. In the daylight, things fall the way they are built to fall. I kept my children steady, kept my voice even, and let the truth do its work. Now, the final story. I am not an expert at payback. I am simply patient. 7 years ago, after a decade of saving, I bought a small place of my own. I signed the papers with shaky hands and a grin I could not hide. It was on a shared block, but the title was freehold, or so every ad, email, and friendly assurance said. Freedom, with a price tag I could carry. 5 months later, my neighbor knocked to discuss insurance for the shared walkway. No problem, I said. Send the paperwork so I can keep a copy. The document that landed in my inbox was not for 2 owners sharing a path. It was strata insurance. Rules, committees, bylaws. The exact web I had tried to avoid. I called the lawyer who had handled my conveyance. He was stunned, then thorough. He traced the filings and confirmed what the paper already shouted. The property was strata, not freehold. Somewhere between listing and settlement, the truth had been dressed in a costume. I booked a meeting with the real estate agent. I brought printouts, emails, screenshots, words in black and white, the ads that promised freehold, the messages where my lawyer asked again and again, and the yes that came back every time. He would not budge. He accepted no fault, offered no real remedy, and acted as if my proof were smoke, not fire. We went to mediation. I did not ask for a golden parachute. I asked for something modest and practical. When I eventually sold, his agency would handle it without a fee, or he would cover the cost. He declined. He slid a small number across the table for me to go away. I refused. I could have pursued a legal fight, and even the mediator nudged me in that direction, but my health was fragile then, and I did not have the air for a marathon. So I chose something else. Not a blow, a clock. I kept living. I learned the bylaws. I paid my share. I planted herbs in pots by the window and tried not to taste bitterness in the basil. But I did not forget. I did not forgive a stranger for turning a milestone into a warning, and in the slow hours, I began to sketch an idea. I knew the agent by reputation. Small town, thinner walls. His public life was not exactly private, and old travel photos still floated where anyone with eyes could see them. From there, I drew a boundary for myself. No vandalism, no threats, no midnight drama on a doorstep. If I moved at all, I would move with light fingers and leave no instructions for anyone to copy. I was not interested in becoming the villain of my own story. On the anniversary of my purchase, a year to the day, a bouquet arrived at the agent's home. It carried a short, cryptic note. The message was affectionate, specific, and impossible to prove. Just enough to shake loose a question. The sender signed as L. Nothing more. The next year, the same date. Another bouquet. The same name. A line that hinted at a private memory. The third year, the fourth, the fifth. I kept it simple, consistent, unverifiable. I never used cruel language. I never named a place, a time, or a face. I never included details that could identify a real person. I was not writing a confession. I was writing doubt. From time to time, something else would appear at his home, small, distant, like a postcard from a trip you were not sure you took. The message always sounded familiar. Love, L. A whisper that did not tell anyone what to do, only reminded them to wonder. Nothing changed in my life. I went to work, I paid the insurance bill. I learned to ignore the committee notices that were not worth my blood pressure. Every year on that date, the same little echo ran through his house. Every year I felt a quiet release. I was not getting even. I was letting time carry a note I could not sing out loud. 3 weeks ago, through the grapevine that always overgrows in small communities, I learned what had happened on his end. His marriage was over. The house he shared was divided. His career was no longer his career. And the story, as it was told to me, secondhand and softened by the teller, went like this. Every year on the same day, he received something he could not easily explain. His wife connected the date to a history he had not admitted, and he finally acknowledged an affair that predated my purchase by about a year. I did not plan that line to connect to that dot. Life drew it for me. Before I ever closed on my house, he had taken a trip and returned with a consequence that reached beyond him. He convinced his partner to ignore it. The anniversary I had chosen matched the season of his own mistake. When faced with the echo in his hallway, he did not have the strength to lie again. I have heard what people say about what followed. Lost savings, a move, a business card no longer valid. These are their words, not mine. I did not search court records to savor the details. I did not open champagne. I did not post a victory speech. A twinge of guilt visits me sometimes, the way a draft slips under a door. But then I remember the table where he slid that tiny number across to make my evidence disappear. I I remember the silence he offered in place of repair. And I remember that I never set out to destroy. I set out to be remembered. If you are waiting for me to cheer, you will be disappointed. If you are waiting for me to weep, you will wait a long time. Mostly, I feel stillness. What I did was not kind. It was not hot-headed either. It was a long, cool choice made by someone who had been asked to swallow a lie. I will not pretend it is a model for living. It is simply what I did when I could not carry a lawsuit up the stairs. Let me be plain about one thing. This is not a guide. I am not handing you a checklist. I am telling you a story about patience and the way a small stone dropped on the same day, year after year, can send ripples across a life. I do not recommend it. I do not glamorize it. I am only acknowledging that sometimes the only tool you can lift is time. The house I bought still has its quirks. Shared walls bring shared sounds. The walkway needs work twice a year, and the invoices arrive when they do. I have learned the names of people who vote on paint colors I would never pick. I have learned to choose my battles stingily, and my peace generously. Each spring I replant my herbs. The basil is less bitter now. Or maybe I am. There is an odd comfort in finishing a long game. You wake up and realize the calendar you trained to obey no longer owns you. The date that once hummed with revenge is quiet. The annual ritual is over. The door locked behind it. The key is somewhere I no longer remember. If you ask me what I learned, I would say this. Patience will do what anger cannot. It will not always make you proud, but it will make you deliberate. Also this. When people treat truth as a speed bump, they often learn about gravity the hard way. I did not push. I did not shout. I did not knock over any fences. I nudged a memory into recurring daylight and let it stand there until someone else blinked. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if the agent had handled that first meeting differently. If he had said, "We got it wrong," and then tried to make something right. If he had agreed to the small thing I asked for in mediation. If he had cared about the difference between a listing and a life. Perhaps there would have been no clock, no notes, no echo. Perhaps my basil would have tasted sweet from the start. But the past is a locked drawer, and I have no interest in the key. The only rooms I open now are the ones with light. I read in a chair by the window and let the sun warm my wrist. The walkway gets fixed on schedule. I wave to the neighbor who never missed a meeting. I have learned, at last, to call this place home, even with its fine print. And as for the agent, I wish him accountability. Not ruin, not spectacle. Accountability. May he step into a future where honesty arrives on time and stays put. May the next person who trusts him never have to print evidence to be believed. If that is too much to hope for, then may my quiet, stubborn note echo just long enough to make him think before he shrugs. Final remark. I did not light a match. I set a reminder. Year after year it rang and the truth answered. I keep my peace now, tend my small garden, and let time do the heavy lifting. How would you rule? Leave your verdict in the comments. Thanks for watching Story Jury and keeping it respectful. If you'd like more cases, consider a like and subscribe. See you in the next one.